All right, so it is my great pleasure. I will start. We'll go in the order of alphabetical order, maybe except for myself. Clement Fortin. I'm the professor in the Space Center, and I'm the associate provost for international affairs now. So I was at École Polytechnique for many years before in Montreal, and in mechanical engineering. I've been very active in curriculum reform, in research in PLM systems, and my PhD was in vehicle dynamics and system dynamics. And I've been here at Skoltech since a little after Janusz, when Janusz arrived. I arrived in 2014 as a senior advisor to the president, and then I've been involved more and more in teaching and research at Skoltech and enjoying it. So, and it's a pleasure for me to chair this, this thesis defense today. So let me talk to you first about Professor Dr. Ross Baldick, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. He received his Bachelor of Science and Bachelor degree from the University of Sydney, Australia, and his Master and PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. From 91-92, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, and in 92-93, he was an assistant professor at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Dr. Baldick has published 75 refereed journal papers. His current research involves optimization, economic theory, statistical analysis applied to electrical power system operations, the public policy, technical issues associated with electric transmission under electricity market restructuring, the robustness of electricity system for terrorist attack, and electrification of the transportation industry, and the economic implication of integration of renewables. So we see why Dr. Baldick is on the jury, because this is very, very relevant to the topic of the thesis. So welcome, Dr. Baldick.
Thank you.
Professor Javier Contreras received his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Zaragoza in Spain. In 1989, a MS degree from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and in 92, and then the PhD degree from the University of California, Berkeley in 1997. And since 1998, he has been at the University of Castilla-La Mancha, Ciudad Real, Spain, where he's currently full professor. He has been a consultant for several electricity companies in Spain, and has participated as principal investigator in national, European, and international research projects. In particular, he has been part of the European project Singular, devoted to the introduction of renewable generation of smart distribution grids. He has also been part of the evaluation committee of the International Research Project of the European Commission for Spain, Portugal, Italy, Cyprus, and Colombia. So Dr. Contreras has focused his research towards a broad cross-disciplinary program in the areas of price forecasting, electricity markets, renewable energy, and operation planning of electrical power system. And Dr. Contreras is an active member of the IEEE Power and Energy Society. And he's editor of the IEEE Transaction of Smart Grids, IEEE Transaction of Sustainable Energy, and the Journal of Energy Engineering. So definitely a high level of expertise for the subject of the thesis. Welcome, Professor Contreras. Now, next one is Professor Elena Gryazina, who's right in front of me here. You see her from on your screen, but I have her right in front of me. Elena Gryazina graduated with honors from the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology in Moscow here, and she got a Candidate of Science degree from the Institute of Controlled Sciences, the Russian Academy of Science, under the supervision of Professor Boris Polyak. Her thesis was related to the structure of stability domain in parameter space for linear system control, exploiting algebraic geometry techniques for the engineering problem. Later on, she was involved in research in randomized methods and controlled in optimization. She was a postdoc at the University Joseph Fourier in Grenoble, France, and a visiting researcher at the University of Bergamo, Italy. Her areas of interest are very broad, include robust control, convex and non-convex optimization, Markov chain, Monte Carlo methods, PageRank's problems. And in addition to research activity, Elena is teaching convex analysis optimization at the Yandex Data Analysis School here in Moscow. And she's secretary and program manager of the steering committees of Russian Traditional Summer School for Young Researchers. That means that she's very interested in education, and she's a very active professor, young professor here at Skoltech. So pleasure to have you here, Elena. She also served as a Grand Award judge in international settings and so on. Next one is Benjamin F. Hobbs, is the Theodore M. and K. Chad Professor of Environmental Management, uses system analysis and economics to improve electric utility planning, operations, and policy, as well as management of environmental and water resources systems. Dr. Hobbs is founding director of the Johns Hopkins Environment, Energy, Sustainability, and Health Institute, and he holds a joint appointment in the Department of Applied Mathematics and Statistics. A member of the Johns Hopkins faculty since 1995, he's a co-director of the USCPA Yale Johns Hopkins University Solutions for Energy, Air, Climate, and Health Center, an interdisciplinary team that studies how power generation trends, climate change, and public policy interact to affect air quality. Dr. Hobbs is on the editorial boards of several journals, Energy Economics, Journal of Energy Markets, and so on. And Dr. Hobbs also is a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer and the Institute of Operation Research and Management Sciences, INFORMS. Dr. Hobbs received his BSc degree from South Dakota State University in 1976. He earns a master's degree in resource management and policy from SUNY Syracuse in 1978 and a PhD in environmental systems engineering from Cornell University in 1983. So I think the interdisciplinarity is very important for us at Skoltech. So welcome, Dr. Hobbs, to this jury. We're really looking forward to your participation. Next one that I will talk about is Professor Henni Ouerdane, who's an assistant professor at the Center for Energy Science and Technology here at Skoltech. Professor Ouerdane joined Skoltech as a leading research scientist in 2017 to work on the project Integration and Control of Heat and Power Systems with Variable Loads, funded by the Next Generation Skoltech MIT program. He was promoted to a faculty position in 2018. He was the principal investigator in the Skoltech MIT Next Gen project, and on the Skoltech side, where he focused efforts on indoor microclimate control, both on experimental and theoretical levels. He also takes a very active part in various projects pertaining to other fields of science, such as non-equilibrium thermodynamics, quantum physics, physical chemistry, and biophysics. He's the co-chair of the Engineering System PhD Program Committee, and I thank him for all his help that he's bringing to the committee of the Engineering System Program, which I chair, and he's a member of Skoltech Educational Committee. At Skoltech, he developed 2 graduate courses, Energy Systems Physics and in Engineering, and Non-Equilibrium Processes in Energy Conversion, which he teaches annually. Professor Ouerdane is principal and key co-author of above 60 research publications on a wide range of topics in the physical sciences. Some of his recent works were highlighted by journals and in the Aerophysics News. Okay, so any pleasure to see you here. He's also right in front of me here in this room. Well, let me go next to the supervisors. It's a pleasure to introduce Professor Janusz Bialek, who got a MEng in 1977, a PhD in 1981 in electrical engineering from the Warsaw University of Technology. He's currently is a professor of power energy systems at Newcastle University in the UK, and since 2014, he was also full professor at Skoltech, where he was the founding director of the Center for Energy Systems, where this PhD thesis was born. Previously, Janusz held chair professor position at University of Edinburgh and Durham University, and from 2015 to 2020, he was non-executive independent director of KGOG, Kazakhstan Electricity Grid Operating Company, and in 2012, he was seconded to the Department of Energy and Climate Change of UK government as the EPSRC Science Policy Fellow. He was a visiting professor at Hong Kong University and EPFL in the past, and Janusz has been also a consultant for the UK government, International Energy Agency, European Commission, Scottish government, and several UK power companies. So as you see, Janusz has been very, very active, and I'm sure a number of you know him personally. Janusz's main research interests are in the application of advanced mathematical methods to address techno-economic problems connected with the transformation of power supply industry to a low-carbon economy. His background is definitely in power systems, but his research is interdisciplinary, and he collaborates closely with economists, mathematicians, statisticians, physicists, and social scientists. He has published widely in the field of power systems and smart grids, power system dynamics, and so on. So it's a pleasure to see you at the distance, Janusz. It would have been much better to see you here, but we're glad that you're there. All right, then we have a co-supervisor, Professor David Pozo, who is an assistant professor in the Center of Energy Science and Technology at Skoltech. David obtained his PhD degree in electrical engineering from the University of Castilla-La Mancha in 2013. Prior to Skoltech, Dr. Pozo worked at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, where he did his postdoctoral research from 2013 to 2015. And he's he's a little my far right, because we're following the stanchiation, as you see in the picture maybe of the camera. Dr. Pozo's research interests lie in the field of energy systems and include operation research, uncertainty gains and statistics, as well as renewable energy and its impact on power system and electricity markets. He also focuses on problems of optimization and flexibility of modern power systems. Dr. Pozo gave undergraduate lectures, workshops, graduate seminars on the latest developments in modeling and optimization. Apart from the University of Castilla-La Mancha and Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, he worked at and visited the University of Southampton in the UK and the University of Hong Kong, China. He also participated in a number of privately and publicly funded research projects in a number of countries, including Spain, Chile, and Brazil. Dr. Pozo is a winner of several public and private grants, including a grant with the government of Chile in 2013, and has published a number of papers already. And since 2018, Dr. Pozo is leading a research group on power markets analytics, computer science, and optimization. And it's a pleasure to see him here. Real pleasure. All right, now we go with the person of the day, Andrey Churkin, who wrote the thesis, which you all, the members of the jury, all read. And Andrew graduated from National Research University of Moscow Power Engineering Institute. He was studying distribution power system design, operation control, and power quality management. At Skoltech, Andrey focused on electricity markets, as you will see, mathematical optimization, game theory, and energy policies. He studies issues of cross-border power interconnections planning and promotes international energy cooperation. So he participated in a number of conferences at the international level, including Falling Walls Lab in Berlin, IEEE PES Power Tech, Inform's annual meetings, Asia International Grid Connection Symposium in Tokyo, Global Energy Interconnection Forum in Beijing, China in 2017. So, Andrey, the floor is yours. We will listen carefully to you, and we will wait to the end to have questions for you. It's all for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Clement, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on site or online. This is a very important day for me. And before starting the presentation, I want to say a special thanks to the reviewers of this thesis who put much effort into reading and revising it. I received a lot of useful comments and suggestions that helped me to improve the quality of the work significantly. So I appreciate this. Thank you very much. And now, without further ado, let me present you the results of my thesis titled Stability Analysis in Coalitional Games for Cross-Border Power Interconnection Planning. And the keywords here are coalitional games, which means that we formulate cooperation in transmission expansion projects as cooperative games and use cooperative game theory to solve the subsequent cost allocation issues. And also, in this thesis, I pay a special attention to the stability of this cooperation, which means that I try to answer the question of how likely it is that a certain project of cross-border interconnections would be realized. You can see here the outline of my presentation. I will start with motivation and objectives of the research, and then I will introduce a series of case studies to demonstrate why cooperative game theory could be useful in cross-border transmission expansion planning. And I will highlight the contributions of the research. So you may see there are many sections here, but don't worry, I will recall this outline later to guide you through the material. And let me start with some general information. You may see on this slide data from the World Trade Organization, and this is the world merchandise volume and world GDP. And you can see that despite some crises, the economy of the world is growing steadily with the average pace of 2.5%. We can take a look at the merchandise imports and exports and see the similar pictures here, which show us that countries cooperate more and more economically. And the same happens in energy trade. These are the charts from the International Energy Agency, and we can see here the current status of the global gas trade flows. And we see that countries cooperate a lot in trading natural gas. And the forecast is that the amount of gas traded will about double by 2040. And at this moment, unfortunately, I have to note that international trade in electricity is lagging behind. Of course, there are some exceptions. For example, North America and Europe, which have multiple cross-border power interconnection projects and initiatives that imply installing of dozens of gigawatts of transmission capacity. But in other regions, the situation is quite different. This is the chart that I generated from the Asia-Pacific Energy Portal. And here you can see energy exports by product in East and Northeast Asia. So we see that the exports evolve, they increase, but the share of electricity, this blue component, is not changing, which means that no new cross-border interconnections have been built during the last 20 years. And at this moment, I want to discuss opportunities of international electricity trade. First, we should, of course, mention possible generation cost savings and decrease in consumers' payment. And the second 2 points are somehow related with CO2 emissions reduction and increased access to renewable energy sources. And moreover, interconnected countries can improve their stability and flexibility via reserve capacity exchange and sharing. But there are multiple challenges and obstacles to international electricity trade. We can mention here operation and control of interconnected power systems. This requires coordinating of grid codes, solving issues of frequency, deviation propagations, and so on. Energy security policies, which means that some countries do not encourage international electricity trade. They don't want to rely on generation as foreign power systems. Also, long-distance transmission technologies, political or economic mistrust between neighboring countries, and mechanisms of cooperation in cross-border transmission expansion plan. And this is the issues that my thesis focuses on. We can further discuss this as allocation of costs and benefits, estimation of compensations between power system operators, and arrangement of investment scheme and payments. And you see there are many challenges and obstacles. And considering all of this, I want to pose here the following question. How to estimate the stability of cooperation over a cross-border transmission expansion project? Well, there is no single answer to this question, but what I propose in my thesis is to use cooperative game theory solution concepts to analyze coalitional stability of the expansion plan, and if needed, suggest modifications. And here we should ask another question. All right, but what do we mean by stability? And again, there are multiple definitions of stability, but in my thesis, I focus on this technical and economic problem, and I formulate stability, which means that it is not profitable, or we can say incentive compatible, for a player to leave a coalition and become an individual player, or to join sub-coalitions with fewer players. Basically, this means that all the participants of the project should be happy to cooperate. They should be compensated enough to be persuaded to stay in the project. And this also implies that there should be some allocation solutions that will satisfy all the parties. And also we say that if there are many solutions, if the space of this stable solutions is big, then we consider that coalitional stability of this project is also significant. And more formal definitions will follow soon. Here we come to the objectives of my thesis. As I say, I propose using cooperative game theory to estimate the stability of cooperation in transmission expansion projects. And moreover, I suggest to develop an anticipative approach that enables to identify transmission plans with a predefined level of stability. By anticipative, I mean a proactive approach. So as you can see here, instead of post-factum analysis of cooperative games, I suggest including game theory principles into the planning model. And in this manner, we can perform an ex-ante estimation of coalitional stability. Second, I analyze the strategic behavior of players and the ways of manipulating the allocation mechanisms. And third, I examine the applicability of the game theoretic framework to real-world case studies of cross-border power interconnections. And before going to the models, let me mention that in this thesis, I performed rather unusual literature review. I identified the 3 studies that are very related to my work. You can see these studies here from 1996, 99, and 2002. And then I gathered information on the citations of these 3 papers and composed this citation network, which in total has about 4,000 notes, 4,000 articles. And I use special graph layout algorithms and modularity algorithms to understand what is the current state of the art in this field. And I identified the main research communities, their contributions. And also this citation network analysis helped me to justify the novelty of my research, because I found no studies in power systems that examine possible manipulation of allocation rules or suggest including game theory principles into the planning algorithm. Here you may see another picture from my thesis. This is the most frequent keywords in the related studies. And actually what this picture tells us, it shows what is the contribution of my research. And my contribution is somewhere in between transmission expansion planning studies, game theory, and multi-agent systems. Okay, and now we come to the basics of electricity market integration and transmission expansion planning. I want to start with the simplest possible example. We have here 2 power systems that can build an interconnection. And note that these power systems have different supply functions and different demands. We can visualize market clearings at both power systems, and you can see here the prices and other parameters like red region's generation cost, blue region's generation surplus, and consumer payments. And then we can model a situation where a 400 megawatt line is built, and since system A had lower electricity cost, it is going to export power towards system B. And situation in both markets change. But what is important here is that the total generation cost has decreased after the interconnection, which means that countries can obtain certain benefits in terms of cost savings if cooperating in building this transmission line. Mathematically, this can be formulated as a cost minimization model. We use a rather simple model, as you can see on the left here. In objective function, we minimize generation costs and investment costs. subject to a set of linear constraints, namely nodal power balance, generations output limits, power flow limits, and maximum power line capacities. And indeed, these are linear constraints. As I display here, you can see that the space of feasible solutions is this triangle, and any convex optimization algorithm should show us that we are going to move from point 1 of building no capacity to this point of building maximum capacity under these assumptions. And in this case, building this line leads us to a cost savings equivalent to $8,800 per hour. And the question is, okay, if building this line and cooperating, how we should split the savings among the countries. And here, cooperative game theory comes on the stage. We can visualize the set of possible allocations as space, a ruler here with some solutions. For example, at this point, we can say that system A gets 0 cost to pay and system B gets the entire cost of the project to pay. But how to select a rational solution from this space? Here we should discuss what is a cooperative game. And a cooperative game with transferable utility specifies a cost for every possible coalition. So the variables that we're dealing here are the set of players, the set of possible coalitions, and the costs of these coalitions. And these cost of coalitions are usually called the characteristic function of the cooperative game. And we need to discuss several properties here. For example, a vector X, which is called a vector of imputations or allocations, is called efficient for a cooperative game if it allocates exactly the entire cost of the project. So nothing is lost there. And 2 constraints below, individual rationality and coalitional rationality. They mean that players would not accept a cost allocation that is higher than the cost that they can obtain on their own. So that's why these conditions are called rationality conditions. And 3 of these conditions together form the core of the game, which is a very important concept of cooperative game theory. And we can show these constraints. For example, here, the gray region is the region where system A pays more than $6,250 per hour. And this is, we can say, a forbidden, not rational region. We cannot select an allocation from there because they are not rational. And system B does the same. And here we are left with this white range, which is the core of the game. And how can we select a single allocation solution from this range? Well, we need to consider other allocation solutions, and very important concept is called the Shapley value. It satisfies several axiomatic definitions, axiomatic properties, and also it is very well known for its ability to capture players' marginal contributions. As you can see in this formula, this is the difference of the value of coalition with player I minus the value without player I, which means that this is the marginal contribution of player. And in this manner, we calculate the weighted sum of marginal contributions, and we can allocate the cost of players. And this is the result of the allocation. Note that Shapley value allocates the cost right in the center of the bargaining range. So each of the players gets half of the cost of the savings. Sorry. And before moving forward, let me mention a few more important concepts. The excess of the coalition. This is the measure of how satisfied a certain coalition is with the allocation. As you can see in the formula, this is the difference of the value of the coalition minus what is allocated to this coalition. So we can measure how coalitions are satisfied. And here comes another important concept, the nucleolus. Formally, this is the imputation which lexicographically maximizes the excess value. But in other words, we can say that the idea of nucleolus is to make the most dissatisfied coalitions more satisfied. And also for any distinct pair of players, we can analyze maximum surplus of player I over player J. This is the minimal cost that player I can get without cooperating with player J. And due to the nature of this concept, it is often called the bilateral surplus or bilateral threat, because players, in some sense, would threaten each other or to leave the coalition and reduce some savings. Okay, this is all with the basics, and now we should consider more complex case studies. And here comes the 3-system case. You see, we use again the same setting here. Three-power systems can build power interconnections. The data is shown in this table. And according to the supply functions, I can tell you that system A would have the lowest electricity price, system B would have the highest electricity price, which means that system A would be exporting power to system B. And system C is in somehow interim position, so it would be a transfer function. And we can solve this problem again using the transmission expansion model that we discussed, optimize the costs and investments, and we can solve it for different coalitions. This is the result for coalition of no cooperation. You see that no lines are built, and we see the total cost of this scenario. Well, now we can solve it for the grand coalition, which means that all the players participate here, and you can see that all the lines are built to a maximum 100 megawatts. And we obtain here the cost savings of 5.7%. And to compose this characteristic function of the game, we need to consider the remaining scenarios, and therefore we compute the expansion plans for coalition AB, AC, and BC. Right. So now the cooperative game is formulated, and we can apply the solution concept. And I show the allocation solutions in the next slide in this table. So I use different colors to distinguish systems, and the values in this table show the costs allocated to systems in dollars per hour, or in the brackets, the savings. And also it is possible to visualize these solutions using the barycentric coordinate system. You can see the triangle here. And in this system, we can indicate any possible allocation. And to give you an intuition, we can consider this vertex A, for example. And at this point, system A gets the entire savings of the cooperation, which is of course not a rational solution. And the further we move from this point, the less savings are allocated to system A, and more savings are given to other players. And you see, I plotted here the three solutions that we considered: the Shapley value, the nucleus, and the equal sharing. And you can verify that equal sharing is indeed equal, because this point E is located right in the center of the gravity of this figure. And also we can add rationality conditions and plot the core of the game. So this gray region is the core, the set of rational and stable allocations. And looking at these results, we can say that cooperation in this particular case study is rather stable. The core has big area, and the solution concepts are within the core. Actually, many studies followed the same way while using cooperative game theory. I showed here a number of important references, and all of these studies analyzed possible scenarios of transmission expansion planning. Then they formulated cooperative game, solved it, checked the core, and concluded that game theory can be applied for cost allocation. And here, please note that this is an exposed game theoretic analysis. And in my thesis, I propose an opposite approach. I suggest to incorporate game theory principles into the transmission expansion planning algorithm. And I will show you how this can be done in a moment. So recall we considered in the previous case all possible coalitions. We solved it one by one. So in my thesis, I say, what if I solve this scenario simultaneously using Karosh-Kuntaker optimality conditions? And then I can automatically formulate the characteristic function of the cooperative game. And I can pass this information to the game theoretic level, where I can impose the core constraints and additional game theoretic conditions, and solve this cooperative game in this manner. So my proposal here is to create a feedback loop from the game theoretic level to the planning level. And actually, this means that I'm trying to perform a topology control of the interconnections, subject to game theoretic constraints, which means subject to coalitional stability. Let me spend more time here to explain each of these layers. So this is the cost minimization of each coalition, the same model that we discussed earlier. And I reformulated for every coalition simultaneously using KKT conditions. I use different colors to show clear stationarity, dual feasibility, complementary slackness, and primal feasibility conditions. And please note that here I included an additional variable called FL max prime. And this variable, it serves as a coordinating variable that we are going to use to control our investment decisions. The next level is a characteristic function of the cooperative game. This is rather easy. The value of each scenario, of each coalition, is the sum of the minimized cost of the players that are within this coalition. So we just compose this function by gathering these variables. And this is the hard part. It could look confusing, the game theoretic constraints, but don't worry, I use some colors here. For example, this, by the blue color, I show the core of the game. So as we already discussed, I impose efficiency constraint and coalitional rationality constraint, which means that no one would accept a cost higher than its own cost. And if in some transmission expansion plan, the core turns out to be empty, then for sure we need to change the initial plan. And this second constraints here in purple are coalitional stability constraints. And here I use the metric that I mentioned called maximum surplus of players. Using these formulations, I simultaneously find the surpluses for each possible pair of players, and I restrict them from below or from above. So imposing upper or lower bounds on the maximum surpluses, which should also indicate the level of stability. And yes, please notice the values that are transferred between these layers. And this is our coordinating variable that performs topological control in the planning decisions. So what are the advantages of this model? To illustrate this, I introduce another case study, the 4-power systems interconnection. We use the same setting here, and the data for the systems is shown in this table, but I can tell you that system B would have the highest electricity price, and it will be a pure power importer. And system A will have the second highest electricity price. Systems C and D have really cheap electricity, and they will be selling power to other systems. So again, let's solve this transmission expansion plan. And this is coalition of no cooperation, the grant coalition, and the remaining coalitions. There will be 15 coalitions in total here, but I don't show them. And we see that in the grant coalition, the cost savings can amount to 4.1% of the total savings. And also we see the topology of this plan. These lines 5 and 3 are built to the maximum 100 megawatts. And this line are built less, and this line also does have its maximum capacity. So the question here is, does the optimal expansion plan lead to stable cooperation? And in my thesis, I argue that such plans could be a disaster for the parties because some players could be severely underestimated in the grant coalition. And in this case, I'm talking about system A, because in the grant coalition, it is not a very useful player. Most of the power is traded with system B. But system A is still a useful player in sub-coalitions when it's cooperating with system C, system D, or in the coalition ACD. And instead of words, let me show you the picture. Yes, this is the set of imputations, and the logic is similar here. It's the barycentric coordinates. So we have this tetrahedron with 4 vertices. Each vertex shows us a solution where one player gets the entire savings. And we can plot the core of the game as this gray region. And you may notice that something is wrong with this case. Something is wrong with the coalitional stability, because the core of the game is small in volume, it is tiny, and it is located very distant from system A. It is so distant that even the equal sharing point and the Shapley value fall out of the core, which means that if one tries to solve this case using the Shapley value, he would fail because the Shapley value is not a rational solution. So what can we do about this case study? Well, we solved the bilevel transmission expansion planning model with some game theoretic constraints. So here you can see the lower bound imposed on player surpluses. The logic of such a constraint means that we try to restrict player surpluses from below, and we try to make them more equally important in this cooperation. And then I impose even more constraints here. Let's see what happens with the core of the game. It transforms like this and like this. So let me repeat the animation. We had this optimal case with the optimal level of savings, and then we sacrifice our economic efficiency to get the stability of cooperation. savings. Here we have 3.9% of savings, but the core modified a lot, and you see that it increased in volume, and now it contains all of the solutions: equal sharing points, Shapley value, and nucleols. So definitely the stability of cooperation improved. And yes, we can also take a look at the planning decisions and see that these lines 5 and 3 are not built anymore at their maximum. So the model tells us that we should better send some power through system A to also take into account its importance. And then I performed simulations iteratively, imposing different lower bound constraints. And you can see in this slide changes in transmission capacities. And we can identify a few regions here, which means that we can identify a menu of suboptimal solutions with different coalitional stability. And note that, yes, this is optimality versus stability. This was the optimal expansion plan with the least cost. And once we impose additional conditions, the cost starts increasing. But good things that after some point, there becomes a state of multi-bilateral equilibrium where all the players have equal threats against each other, and this could be considered as the stable expansion plan. So the question may be asked here, why is this useful? And in my thesis, I found at least 2 possible applications of this approach. And first, this bi-level planning with game-theoretic coalitional stability constraints reflects a sanctions approach. An international entity, coordinating entity, may be willing to diversify its energy supply or restrict bargaining power of some participants. By the way, these issues are especially acute in gas supply systems, for example, in European natural gas supply system. And in this, using this model, an international entity can select sanctions wisely, not to ban the entire project, but rather to restrict its capacity partially to make players more equal in the cooperation. And second application, this model can be used by the World Bank or some international funding agencies and institutions while assessing projects and negotiations. For example, a preference could be given to a project with a desirable level of coalitional stability. In other
I think we've lost contact.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I can't hear anymore.
No. Now.
Okay.
We're back.
We are back. Okay, good.
yes, should I continue?
Well, there is a problem here. Let's see. Okay, sharing screen.
Can you share the screen again because we've lost sharing? Okay, good.
Thank you. So here we come to the second part of my thesis.
But you need to go down. We need to go to the right slide.
Next, please. Next. Yes, here. No.
Before.
Even. No, 41. I think.
41. This one?
Yes. Thank you. So here we come to the second part of my report, and in this part I examine strategic behavior and manipulability of allocation mechanisms. And recall this simple example that we considered in the beginning. We had 2 power systems interconnecting, and recall that these black lines show true cost functions of the systems. But what happens if countries agree to cooperate? They agree on some allocation rule, let's say the Shapley value, but then they submit their information untruthfully. And I show this by these purple dashed lines. So these are the cost functions that are declared by the systems. And in this case, after the interconnection, there will be some shares of savings hidden, unlike unrevealed savings. I can show this in these diagrams. And basically, which means that power systems can manipulate the allocation rule. And again, I performed some simulations, iteratively changing the costs declared by the countries. And you can see here very obvious results. system A, as a power exporter, has to increase its declared cost, so it's moving its cost to the right, in order to obtain some share of additional share of savings. And system B does the opposite. It should claim lower cost functions. But what happens if two power systems manipulate the allocation rule simultaneously? Well, these already have been studied in game theory, and such games are called manipulation games, which is a non-cooperative game over the cooperation. And I analyzed this for this simple case study. Let me show the next slide. Yes, using the equilibrium analysis. So what you see here are possible strategies of players. Actually, so there are 17 by 17 payoff metrics, and I show here cost deviation by system A and system B, sorry, it's negative direction, and system A. And the grayscale here shows the true total cost of the functions. So this area with the dark gray color means that less capacity is built between the systems due to the manipulations. So we can say that this is the bad area. And interestingly, the area, space of equilibrium solutions is located right at the edge of this area, which means that here we can note that players would not have incentives to harm the overall efficiency of the transmission expansion projects, and the resulting expansion plan would remain optimal or near optimal. But the bad thing is that if manipulating the game, the allocation rule, very few savings would be revealed, which is of course bad for the international project to get funding. And let me ask a few questions here about this equilibrium analysis and modeling. What are the equilibria in cooperative games, manipulation games in 3 systems or n systems? Here we analyzed a simple case study. We were able to compute Nash equilibria, but for n-player games, it's required to formulate equilibrium models, like equilibrium models with, for example, equilibrium constraints, and to thoroughly analyze what are the possible outcomes of these manipulations. Also, the question, how different cooperative game theory solution concepts affect player strategies. Here we consider the standard allocation solution, but in n-player games, the solutions could lead, different solutions could lead to different equilibria. What metric or index should be used to describe and compare manipulations in different games and different case studies? What feedback should the equilibrium analysis give to the design of transmission plans and allocation mechanisms? And what are the equilibria in manipulation games under the developed bi-level planning approach? I address these issues partially in my thesis, but what I want to highlight here that, of course, further research is needed to estimate the applicability of cooperative game theory in the projects of cross-border transmission expansion planning. And here we come to the last section of my presentation, where I analyzed the real-world case study of cross-border power interconnections in the Northeast Asia. And you can see the scheme of the proposed interconnections in the slide. Again, we used similar model to optimize the investment costs here to solve this transmission expansion problem. And here you can see the optimal solution, the directions of power flows and capacities built. And this results in total savings up to $7 billion per year. And again, the question is how to allocate this cost between the countries. And again, we formulate a cooperative game among between 6 players. Let me introduce the players. Sorry, okay, there were 6 players here by countries: Russia, Mongolia, China, North Korea, South Korea, and Japan. And then we calculate all possible coalitions. In case of 6 players, there will be 63 coalitions. As you can see here, the data generation and investment costs. And this coalition, the Grand Coalition, indeed is the optimal one, the least cost one for the region, so countries should go for it. But the question is, how stable is this cooperation? And having computed all the coalitions and composed the characteristic function, I implemented several allocations here. For example, you can see the allocation of savings according to the Shapley value and according to the nucleolus. These diagrams are rather similar, and what they are actually showing us is the bargaining power of players. So we see what players are more important in this cooperation. But how to analyze the stability? First, I calculated the maximum surpluses of players, these bilateral threads, and you can see them in these bilateral diagrams. Again, the allocation on the surpluses under the Shapley value and the nucleolus. And you can notice that under the nucleolus, these bilateral surpluses are equal pairwise. So in each pair, players have equal surpluses against each other. What this diagram actually shows us is the influence and interconnection of players. And you can notice that there are 4 major players here: China, North Korea, Russia, and Japan, which are very influential in this interconnection. And there exists this, I would say, serious disbalance in players' positions because Mongolia and the Republic of Korea have much less bargaining power here, which could be a potential issue for this particular project. And also, to analyze stability, we can again check the core of the game. For the 6-player cooperative game, it is impossible to display the entire core in 3 dimensions. But what we can do here, we can display the projections of the core of the game. So here you can see on the left the projection on the game between Russia, China, North Korea, and Japan, and projection onto Russia, Japan, North Korea, and South Korea. So we see that the core is rather significant in volume, and moreover, the Shapley value is within the core, and it is close to the center of the core. So we can conclude here that even though there exists a disbalance in players' positions, the core of the game is still rather big in volume, and there should be enough savings to compensate all the countries and persuade them to participate in this project. Okay, and here we come to the original contributions of my work. The main contribution is the bi-level model developed. As I said, I proposed including the game theory principles into the expansion model itself, rather than thinking of them as an ex-post analysis step. And I demonstrated you the advantages of this approach. I performed the manipulability analysis of cost allocation rules, analyzed incentives of players, and discussed the need for developing strategy-proof mechanisms of cooperation. And finally, I considered a real-world case study of interconnections in Northeast Asia. I implemented game theory principles and analyzed the stability of cooperation. As an additional contribution, I mentioned here the citation network analysis. Actually, we're in the process of publishing this review paper where we discuss the current state of art of cooperative game theory applications. Yes, and the list of my publications, I have the main paper is the paper in the Energy Economics Journal and 2 conference papers. And as I said, 1 paper is submitted to Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews. And the results of this research have been presented at a number of conferences, Falling Walls Lab in Berlin, in Forum's annual meetings here last year, symposium in Japan, and so on. I think these are the main results of my thesis. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. We will now go into the questions of the jury members, and I will go and I will ask Dr. Baldick to start. And like I said earlier, we can do one round first, and then we'll probably come back for a second one for sure. I will give you a chance to also ask a second round of questions. Okay, please.
Super. So on slide 51, could you just display slide 51 again, please? Andrew?
Yes, I'm waiting for this.
Okay, all good.
Slide 51, please. 1 second. I don't have the control anymore.
Fair, understood. I get it.
51.
51, okay. Okay,
Now
I'm
you have it. Yes.
Okay. Okay, yes.
Maybe 50. One further back. I'm sorry, I wrote down the wrong number. So you observed, and I think this is an interesting observation, that Mongolia and the Republic of Korea had less power, so to speak, in the negotiating game. And I noticed that geographically they are at the edges of the system somehow. Is there a more general notion that you can decide that's geographically at the edge of a system is perhaps likely to have less power? In contrast, North Korea, which is somehow between everybody, has relatively more power than the size of their electric consumption might suggest, right? So is it a betweenness type thing that leads to this, or is that a spurious association that I'm making about the geography of the system, imputing something about power spuriously from the geography of the system? Or is there something there that might help you to make a more general observation?
Yes, thank you for the question. And you're right, topology is very important in determining the power of the players. And one of the most powerful players here is the North Korea. That actually is a transfer country here. But you see that two very important power roads come through the North Korea. So that's why it's a very important player. And Mongolia also has like a transferring role here, but there exist other roads, right? Bypassing Mongolia. And therefore, the model tells us that actually North Korea is very important. Mongolia is a less influential player here. So topology is one of the key factors.
I don't know whether you've already commented on that, but maybe it would be worth adding a comment around that issue if you have not already made that observation in your thesis.
So, sorry, what issue?
The issue of the effect of topology on influence. Perhaps you've already made some comments in the dissertation. Apologies if I am not recalling them. But if you have not already discussed that issue or made a comment about the topology, it might be worth adding just a sentence somewhere in the context of this section of your thesis.
I think I discussed this. For example, there are some plans to build a cable line right from the mainland China to the Republic of Korea. And I think I discussed somewhere that, for example, we can consider another game and say that in this second game, this line is actually possible. And probably this will change the bargaining power of the players dramatically.
Good. Okay. So I would just suggest maybe making that connection clearer at the time that you bring up in your dissertation, at the time that the place where you bring up slide 47, 48, 49, 51, maybe just add a sentence there. Maybe, again, perhaps I'm not remembering every detail in your material, but if you haven't already made a comment on it, I think that would be an interesting comment to make. In any case, that's the only question I have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Baldick. And then Professor Contreras, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Is it I'm supposed to make one question too, or how does it go? This one question?
Oh, one or two or three.
Okay, I go. Yeah, I will. I have a question on the example of the 4 nodes that you have, the 4 system case. When you mention the case with the least cost, I assume it's an example where there are no coalitions, but just the single system is solved to have the least cost. Is it true? Or
yes, the models that they use in my thesis.
So supposedly that's the best solution according to the assumption that there are no sides here. I mean, everybody's in the same boat. But when you mention in table 6.2 the no cooperation one, is it the same as the least cost, or how does it work?
Okay, so thank you for the question. The models that I use in my thesis are models of centralized planning. So yes, if I show you this this expansion plan, this means that this is the optimal, the least cost plan, because the centralized planning is performed here to estimate the best power lines investment. So I do not consider like decentralized solutions here. And what I mean by no cooperation, I simply mean one basic scenario where no cooperation means no lines. This is used just to estimate the initial cost of the systems.
Okay, so that should be the. But in your system, in this four system example, is the grand coalition allowed by your bi-level model or not? It's not clear to me finally when I read it. Is it possible to have all these imputations by the core and the kernel and then have a grand coalition solution or not?
Okay, so this is the space of imputations and the core for the grand coalition, for the optimal expansion plan. And we can say that it is somehow possible to arrange this cooperation because the core is not empty, right? We can say that at least we have some solutions here, like the nucleolus. But what I notice here is that this core is small in volume, and I interpret this as coalitional stability issues. So answering to your question, yes, it is possible to find a feasible pair because the core is not empty, but the core turns out to be rather small in volume.
But due to non-convexity, that could be why the Shapley value is not within the core, is it right?
Yes. In this picture, Shapley value is out of the core.
Yeah. Yes. I see. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
That's it? You don't have another question, Dr. Contreras? No?
Well, I do have some, but I don't know if we should go to a second round or.
No. We'll go around. You can continue for a while. No problem.
Okay. I will not spend much. Well, if I understand the model itself, which is the core, you could say the core of your thesis, again, as the core of the game. You use the kernel stability conditions within this lower level model, if I'm correct.
Yes, but
why did you use the kernel since you have many other ways to solve this stability issue? I mean, this is not the only way. Have you tried different ways to find solutions within the core, but not using the this maximum surplus equilibrium condition of the kernel?
No, I haven't. I mainly relied on this maximum surpluses estimation, which is related to kernel, as you said. And of course, there are, I think, multiple ways to restrict the game. Somehow we can simply say that we compute the Shapley value and then we want the Shapley value to split somehow equally, right? So there are different ways, but yes, I relied on maximum surplus, which is the kernel.
Okay. And well, there are other things that you mentioned, but one of the problems that our game theory models have is that you cannot guarantee that the grand coalition, which should be our goal, should be achieved. That we know because of the non-convexities, because players may play different roles in different coalitions. Therefore, you cannot guarantee that the grand coalition will be formed. And my question is, although it's a heuristic method, have you tried to find some type of dynamic coalition formation by couples or by triplets, maybe, I don't know, so that at least you could see the players who are the most willing ones to form coalitions, although not the big ones, not the grand coalition, but small ones that are sufficiently stable, and then try to see if you can find stability among these, or among, I would say, these small coalitions, instead of having all these bilateral agreements that bilateral equilibria that you are finding by imposing the kernel conditions. I don't know if I was clear or.
I understood. Thank you. So yes, the assumption in my work is that the grand coalition should be formed, but I understand what you talk about because I think I read your paper on dynamic coalitional stability, and I didn't examine this, but I think it could be interesting of what happens if players start with creating some smaller conditions, and then maybe then they come to the grand coalition. But I didn't examine this in my thesis.
I see. Yeah, because you know, many times you have, I mean, one of the big problems of coalitional game theory is that, first of all, because of this excess theory and rationality, grand coalition will not always satisfy all of them at the same time. That's unavoidable, and that's the way it is, unless you have some sort of side payments, which by economic theory is something that people are not willing to use. That's why I guess you mentioned in one of the examples that you minimize for money transfers among players. Have you tried to avoid this type of side payments when you solve your problems?
No, I agree with you, and I think the things that you mentioned are the assumptions of my work, that that countries can form the grand coalition and then they can arrange transferable utility payments. But I didn't examine beyond these assumptions yet.
Okay, well, just to conclude, I congratulate you because as you showed in your extremely exhaustive reference of the literature, which I was really amazed, the depth of your search. It's, for me, it's wonderful. I can see finally that game theory can be implemented within an optimization problem and not ex post, which is something I think it's a very good idea. I congratulate you on that and your supervisors. And the other thing is that you, I like the manipulation, the manipulative cost study, because that's reality. And can you tell us something about if you could think of a mechanism that could avoid this problem, or you think it's an unsolvable problem? The manipulation is unavoidable, of course, but some mechanism that induces people not to lie when they declare their costs. Do you think that that could be embedded within your model at some point, or you think that's something like future research, as you mentioned?
Thank you for the question. I think this is really a hard question, and I read some literature that I mentioned in the thesis, the algorithmic mechanism design, and they consider auctions and other problems, and they prove mathematically what are the mechanisms that are prone to manipulations or are not prone to manipulations. And in this case, I think this is for sure a direction for future research, but it would need not only simulations but also some fundamental proofs what should be the mechanism that will make players to reveal their true information, or at least deviate not so much. But it's really a hard question here, and I have some other results of simulations, but in the thesis I was not able to prevent the manipulations.
Okay, thanks very much. For now, I don't have more questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so we'll go to Professor Hobbs, please.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I hear you well.
Oh, great. I've got, just like my comments in the thesis, my questions can be extensive, but I'll try to rein them in. I know it's later in the day there. I'll go right to a question here. In all the implementations, generation capacity expansion was not considered, which, given the length of time it takes to build transmission and the lifetime of transmission assets, is a little bit limiting, perhaps. But Andrew, I would like you to argue, sort of in classic English debate style, both sides of the question. So one side would say that you can still get essential insights from having generation play an operations only game, hold their hold the investment in capital fixed. If you could argue in favor of that you still get valuable insights from the applications you have. And then could you also argue the other side that since capital costs dominate, especially in a highly renewable system, which we're heading more and more towards, since capital costs are so important that the impact of a transmission grid reinforcements upon where and when and what kind of generation is built is likely to have a huge impact on the net benefits of building transmission. Could you argue both sides of that? What do you think the pros and cons are? And then tell me what you really think. Must we model generation capacity expansion to get a good idea of transmission benefits or not?
Thank you for the question. I think you add this comment into the report, and I agree with you that I do not consider generation expansion, which could be a limitation of the model, because we don't see what happens after we build the lines. And I read multiple papers considering these problems. And indeed, if we consider all the market participants, rational investors in transmission planners, generation companies, then we probably can see that if somewhere the new line is going to be built, this will change the investment plans. And I also included the example from Texas of these renewable zones when you build the line and then you anticipate that the renewable generation will appear there. So basically you pave the way for some other investments. You change the generation investments, influence them by making transmission investments. So this could be a limitation of the model. And I think the correct answer would be to compose a case or a real case study and do both, like with generation expansion and without, and see the difference. And then we can see what is how accurate is our model and what are possible pitfalls here. Maybe if we build a line, there are definitely for some countries an opportunity appears to invest even more in generation, right? And for other countries like importers, there are less opportunities to do this. So your question is pretty hard, I would say, but yes, this is a limitation, and generation expansion planning should be somehow included in the analysis.
Okay, so if I may follow up, is there any reason you could not readily do this with the Eastern Asian example Northeastern Asian example that you solved? Could you have put in capacity expansion for renewables and thermal sources and looked over multiple years? Or are there any obstacles to doing that?
There was an obstacle, the data. I found the data in terms of forecast, and these reports, like forecast reports, said that by 2035, this amount of capacity will be, say, in Japan, and that's all. And it was hard to find what would be the price of investments in 2035. So I decided just to stick to the forecast, keep models simple, and do not consider additional investments in the future. That's why I didn't consider this.
Okay, that's certainly appropriate for a thesis where you're demonstrating a methodology and showing the types of insights you can get. But for an actual planning study, if this was really for the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or something else, would you say it would be essential to put in generation capacity expansion? And would it be practical, or are you saying that the data doesn't exist, so it's not possible to consider generation capacity expansion, and we must satisfy ourselves with simply redispatching whatever generation build out scenario we have?
I like the word you use, essential. So yes, I think it would be essential to include this in the model, especially for countries that have electricity markets developed. And maybe it is could be not essential only for countries that have strict plans, maybe China, which say that in 20 years we have this amount of capacity and it will be true. So in these cases, maybe we shouldn't put possible expansions, generation expansions here. But in most of the cases, it should be essential.
Okay, I'll just close with a comment, which is investment, even in nominally liberalized electricity markets such as the United States, investment in generation is highly political and highly constrained by policy and the whims of regulators. So trying to predict where generation will be built and what type based on a market mechanism in the spirit of anticipative planning a la Enzo Soma and so forth. We may be anticipating changes in where investment will take place, but assuming that's based on market forces may give us very different solutions and impacts than if somehow we could consider how investment might change constrained by policy and the whims of regulators. So in theory, I definitely agree. Capacity cost savings are a big source of benefits of transmission planning, but I am not very optimistic about the ability of models, including my own, to credibly project how generation expansion and investment costs will change if we do transmission, just because of the highly political nature of generation investment. And that may be an insolvable problem.
I agree. I think
so I'll pass the baton.
Yes, go ahead, Andrei.
Yes, thank you for this comment. I fully agree. And I try to believe that our studies should point some principles, some ideas, but what happens in reality, it's hard to judge.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to Professor Gryazina, and we'll please go ahead with your questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start with some simple question and then proceed to more complicated, in my opinion. So in the in slide 6, you show that the electricity trades, this thin blue line, it's like really very small portion of
in Northeast Asia.
Okay. So is it because of the lack of transmission capacity, the lines itself, or the lines do exist, but somehow the countries didn't have any agreement about how much power to transfer?
No, this is because I think the political reasons, because very few lines are built in this particular region of Northeast Asia. I think only lines between Russia and China, and maybe China and India. And we see that no significant new capacity has been added. So this is I showed just some good regions where a lot of transmission capacity exists, and an example of Northeast Asia where we see almost no interconnections, I think because of the political reasons.
Yeah, but getting back to this North and East interconnection, so do you have any information about how the existing lines exploited? Are they fully loaded and just work for 100%, or because of these political reasons they just stand and are not exploited properly?
I know that the lines, let's talk about lines between Russia and China because I know about them. They are built and they are fully exploited, but the rules of trading electricity are pretty simple there. There is a 20 or 25 years contract between Russia and China, which says that every year Russia should send this amount of energy towards China. And that's all. So there are no like market incentives. It's pure export. They build line, it is working, it's all right, but it's not market integration.
Okay, so let me proceed further. So you mentioned that you would like to incorporate some level of stability to your model. And I'm curious what kind of levels you are talking about. Is there any measure for stability, or stability is just a binary variable? Either you have stability or you don't have. So how do you treat this?
So while showing these results, I suggested use the measure that is called the maximum surplus of player I over player J. I said that sometimes it is also called a bilateral threat, but it can reveal players' influence. And by looking at these parameters, we can see that some players are less influential than others, and we can say that maybe this leads to instability issues. And then I restricted this difference, and we saw that the core expanded, and in some cases this would help to improve stability. So two measures here. First, the solutions should be in the core. The core should be okay, let's say the volume of the core is a very good measure of stability. And second, players' influence, which could be measured by this maximum surface. And combining these two things, it is possible to assess a project. So this is the metrics that I use.
Okay, so the larger the core is, the higher is the level of stability.
Yes,
right?
I would say so.
Okay, okay. So, well, the other question is about the power system model. So in your model, you assume that each country is just one node. So like the number of buses in your system is just exactly
I think Russia 3 nodes, China 2 nodes in my model.
Okay.
A few nodes for a big country.
Yeah, but could you please comment about the limitation of such approach?
Yes, it is very high level, very limited, because again, it's impossible to find data on Chinese power systems. And I found some reports, and usually they say that this is North China, this is the forecast hydro resources, prices, and so on, and this is Northeast China, South China. So that's why I split it, the countries by regions, and I put it in a single, several nodes. But if data is available, I think any degree of digitalization of complexity could be used there. But unfortunately, yes, I use just several nodes per country.
Yeah, but why did you? Where did this 3 bus Russia and 2 bus China came from?
From some reports that I found. That usually you say, as I said, Russia.
Because this, I guess that this 2-3 bus system is still the result of some aggregation,
yes,
or simplification,
it's
and it will be just curious to validate if this type of aggregation is valid for your transmission expansion planning problem or not, because it could be other reasons to obtain this high level aggregated model.
I think this is, as I said, valid for preliminary high-level estimation of the project. But if the countries see, let's say, this report and they like the results and they try to really simulate these lines, then of course system operators should come on the stage, and then they should negotiate. They should somehow reveal information and create a detailed model. But in my thesis, I used this type of aggregation.
Okay. And maybe my last comment and question is about this citation review. So the core of this analysis is 3 selected papers.
No, this is the beginning of the analysis. I selected 3 papers because I knew them, and then I started building everything around them.
Right, that's what I mean. So if these 3 papers were chosen some other way, all the analysis could be pretty different, right?
Yes, but very sensitive to experience of a person who does this. And from the starting point, I started with these papers because I like them, but I could have started with 100 papers, but it would be a big and complex network, much more complex. So it depends. I think I say this in the report, that there is a compromise between the coverage of literature and staying focused on some topics, but some mistakes could be done, some papers could be overlooked, some communities could be overlooked, but yep. I think it is better than a common.
Well, that's a perfect analysis. I pretty much enjoyed all these figures. I'm just, what I'm asking is just about the core. So something you start from, these 3 papers, do you consider them the most influential, the papers that give them the most impact to this field? Or just, okay, it's a reputable journal, they're well written. So what was the criteria of choosing them?
Okay, so before doing this, I read a lot of related papers, and I found that one paper that I showed there, it is a paper from 1974 by Dermot Gately on game theory used in allocations of transmission cost in India. But this is a really old paper, and it was cited by many different works. And since then, I found that there is kind of a gap. 1990s. There was the paper of Dermot Gately and some other papers not so related. And then in 1990s, several papers appeared. The paper by Javier Contreras, I think Zalesi and Rudnik. And just by reading these papers, I realized that this could be called like the second wave of the papers, and they are really focused on this topic that I need. And I just selected 3 of them that I liked the most and started building this network. So it was my own judgment what to select.
Okay, so that's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Elena. Professor Ouerdane, it's your turn.
Thank you. So I will just make first a comment on stability because my colleague Professor Gryazina spoke about this question of stability I wanted to ask. But if you go to your slide 8, basically for me stability is more like a state, and you speak about it as a constraint, in fact. Yes. So why what is the link between a constraint and in fact the state? Because stability is not a constraint in itself, yes?
I agree. In your sense, stability more applies to dynamic systems, you could say, like state. But I consider a static picture, a static system itself. And yes, in my case, stability is more like a condition, a constraint. What is stable and what is not. It's not like a stable state. So I think this is simply because my problem is static itself. I consider only one snapshot of our systems planning, and that's all. So that's why equilibrium analysis could be closer to your meaning because there are multiple moves by players, deviations, and then we could say this is the equilibrium, this is the stable state. Here we can say state, but in other examples, I would say like conditions, something.
Okay. Something also that I would like you to comment on is the bargaining power, the influence. Because when you want to enter some negotiations with one partner or several partners, you would like first to anticipate what their bargaining powers would be and assess, before negotiation, assess yours somehow against theirs. So in your approach, is there could we derive from your approach some tool or something that would, let's say, I need to go, I will have a meeting with China and with Russia, and I need to negotiate something. And how could I anticipate my bargaining power against theirs?
Yes, thank you. We can definitely do this using this model and in several ways. First way is to consider an allocation solution. Let's say Shapley value. And for some reason, Shapley value tells you that China gets everything and you get very low share of benefits, which means that somehow China is more influential, it's more important, and you need to understand why this happens. Second, you can take a look at the core of the game. If you're in the center of the core, you are doing good, you are very important in this cooperation. If you are out, if the core is very distant from you, from your point station, which means that there are some conditions in which other countries are better than you. So yeah, the allocation solution, the shape of the core, and last, these bilateral surpluses. You can calculate them and see how potentially could China threaten to you, what is your counter threat, and so on. So multiple parameters could indicate your position.
But then, yes, but then you have to build on the actual state of things. But if you would, for instance, if let's say one of the objectives would be to become carbon neutral, for instance, and you know that you're going to build, let's say, wind power capacity, does that give you some edge against the others or not?
If you consider this important, you need to include this in the model, right? Then you should say that, for example, Japan will not buy power from China because it's not carbon neutral. You put this information in the model, you formulate these additional constraints, and you can see how the bargaining power changes, and maybe you can use this in politics.
Because again, if we consider the penetration of renewables, then you can associate some stochasticity to that also. Because if you want to stabilize, let's say, the transmission of power, I suppose that you need to have some some stability in the generational level. However, yes, so would you consider, for instance, that some countries would have an important nuclear capacity, would be in a better position to negotiate something rather than, compared to some other countries which invest more in renewables like wind or solar?
When you say nuclear, the first thought in my mind is France, and
Yes.
I think that in some negotiations this can be used to improve the bargaining position of France, to say that we have more stable, more reliable, and also clear power from nuclear power plants, because it's not intermittent, it's predictable and controllable to some extent. And maybe this could be used to say that our positions should be better in this negotiation, and, for example, capacity should be built more here than there. But everything that is important should be somehow included in the model.
But in addition then to the model, of course, data is very important. The sources of data, what are they exactly? I mean, literature, scientific literature.
Okay, so if you're asking about sources, we are talking about Asian supergrid. I used international, basically some reports. I used international agency reports, international review, IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, and some orders and laws from countries. There is Chinese planning 5 years yearbook. In Korea, I found some English, some documents from government about their development. So it's technical, not.
Yeah, but then do you consider that these sources are thorough? I mean, are they enough for you? No, because I would consider that a country which basically bases its policy on long-term planning, of course, is easier to analyze. But a country which is more market-driven and more dynamic, has also some stochasticity in it. But the source of data is very important, and the quality of data and the amount of data, everything is.
This is a big issue, and also the model is very sensitive to data. For example, by manipulations or by making a mistake in this gathered data.
Yeah.
So this is a big issue of applying this.
But then, if you had, let's say, the power to ask relevant people about, access to data, what argument would you give them to make sure that they will release all the data that you need?
It's an interesting question. Maybe to say that.
Because you can't just say, okay, I've got this fancy model and everybody's happy with it.
No, I think I know the correct answer here. The answer depends on the position with whom I'm talking. If I'm talking with transfer countries, South Korea, I would say, I want to help your country. Give me proof, show me that you have some resources to participate here. Your position will be better, and I will reveal this in my report. Don't show me your strange plans. I don't know. So it should depend on the position. Should it be importer, exporter, or what is the quality? Many factors.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you very much.
I would not say that this depends on model.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one question. It has to do about risk analysis. Would there be any value to add risk analysis combined with your simulation model or your game theory model? And do you take count of risk? Is it possible?
Yes, yes, I remember this discussion. Excuse me, can we, the last slide, please, the very last slide of the presentation. Yes, so we discussed the risk analysis. It is a hard topic to discuss, but in some sense, I performed this risk analysis by making the sensitivity analysis of data. And also, I think I have some new figures that you didn't see. And this is an interesting figure of sensitivity to changes in transmission capital costs. So one very important factor, what if the lines actually are more expensive? And I performed this analysis and I found some interesting insights. Just opening it like this. And you see, this is the change in transmission capital cost. This is our forecast and it is the increase. And we see that while the cost increases, the savings of the project decrease, which is logical. But interesting thing is, let's take a look at the planning decisions. And once we deviate from the forecast, we see that some lines are okay. They are still built up to maximum, no problem at all. But some lines start losing its capacity because, and I found that these are the lines that go through Russia and Mongolia, and this Russia, Mongolia, China, this export road, and this again shows that this power export road is I would say less beneficial, and under some changes in the data or political situation, this part of the project can be abandoned. So, and in continuing this idea, we can analyze the influence of many parameters: cost, shares of renewables, demand, forecast, some political, I don't know, indicators, and see what are the actual risks. But it's a different topic, and it was hard to me to include.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Your thesis is excellent. So congratulations for this. Well, I think I will go again to the jury members and ask Professor Baldick, Contreras, Hobbs, or all of you, do you have some questions, some more questions? Please feel totally free to ask some more.
Should we go?
I do not have any more questions, so I'll pass it on to Javier and other colleagues.
Very much.
Thank you. I just have one question on the last case of this cross-border in Asia. Finally, when you solve the problem, although ex post, I think my question is, even for such a relatively small number of combinations, so you found, and that's my question, that including all these combinations as the kernel constraints and the core constraints within the problem, and adding them as in the bi-level problem, that's what I didn't understand. That's why I want to ask you. So you were not able to find the same type of solution that you found for the 4-system case?
Yes, thank you for raising this. And I report this in my thesis that indeed for the Asia, I solved it in an ex-post manner, just analyzing some parameters of cooperation. And I was not, unfortunately, able to solve the bi-level model. So what we saw here is the optimal expansion plan and some parameters of the cooperation, like maximum surpluses. But I spent, I think, months on solving this model for Asia, and with 6 players as a bilateral equality constraint, let's say, so the bi-level model. And the number of binaries there rise sharply, and the model doesn't give me the solution with a good.
But the question is, you didn't find the solution because it led the problem to be infeasible, or it was just a matter of timing for the solving the problem? Was the unfeasibility of the constraints that you put?
It was the matter of programming, a matter of solving time. So I plan to somehow work on this formulation further and try to solve it for realistic systems. So it's not infeasible. It is the problem that I was not able to solve it.
So let's put it that way, and then I conclude. So if you have a big supercomputer, then you think that you could be able, we should find some type of solution for that, or even with our resources now, due to the number of possible combinations that you may have, it makes it unfeasible right now.
I think I could solve it having enough resources and enough time, right? But your question is actually very interesting, because what if we have 10 players or 20 players cooperate? How many scenarios there would be to consider? How many surpluses there would be? And in this case, even with a big computer, no one would solve this problem.
Yeah. So we still have that problem for game theory. I guess it's we need some other type of technology. We will see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other Professor Hobbs?
Sure, I would be happy to ask another question. So, Andrew, I'm really grateful for the equilibrium analysis that you did of manipulation strategies. I thought that was a very nice extension and a completion of what you started by looking at unilateral benefits of manipulation. And it was difficult and sophisticated, and I'm astonished that it was possible to do in such a short period of time. So I thank you very much. I really think it enhances things. Could you show the payoff matrix that you had in your presentation? Would that be possible? I'd like to ask you about some of the solutions. So the payoff matrix for the audience shows that when you have two players, when each chooses a strategy, what are the profits that they get? And so you basically brute force look at all possible combinations of strategies and ask, is there a Nash equilibrium? So this is a matrix that's, yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, there we are. Perfect. Whoops. Okay. So, yeah, it is very interesting that the deviation for B is in the negative direction. The deviation for A is in the positive direction. But I wanted to ask about, you noticed that the equilibria are right on the border of the efficient solutions. That is, the players push their stated costs far enough that they don't get allocated any costs, or they get allocated as few costs as possible, but the efficient line is still built. So they go right to the edge, and you show 5 Nash equilibria here, which if you sort of go along the this southwest northeast diagonal, you see that the furthest southwest equilibrium really benefits, I think that's player system A with 5,200, but the furthest northeast one, it's instead player B that gets 5,200. Presumably the sum of those two benefits are about the same. And so the difference between those 5 equilibria is basically the allocation of the benefits of the Grand Coalition. And so what can you tell me, Andrey, about which of these might occur? Is there anything that game theory says when there are multiple Nash equilibria? Is there any reason to expect one or the others to be more likely to occur empirically? Is there any way we can differentiate among these, or must we stop here and just say there are 5, and they're probably, and of course there's solutions in between, solutions right on the edge, which are Nash equilibria, given one system's manipulation, the other one has their optimal response. But about which one is most likely or most desirable, you can't say anything. So tell me what you can say about choosing among these, if we can. Maybe we can't.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. First of all, let me say that this payoff matrix is not accurate enough. And I also performed calculations by, I think, 80 or 100 by 100 strategies, but it's very hard to display this here. So I removed from the thesis. And then we see, like, indeed a straight line of equilibrium. And they are indeed located right at the edge where the line is built up to maximum capacity and is going to decrease its capacity with more manipulations. And first answering the question, I heard that empirically it is hard to reach some of the Nash equilibria, especially if we play like one move game. So if players deviate only once, we can end anywhere, not in the equilibrium. If they play several moves, maybe we can come to some equilibria and stick there. Or maybe if we play, if players are really rational and really accurate, maybe they will see what the equilibria among these 5 ones or infinite ones, which lead to the most total savings, where the sum of these 2 savings is bigger. But it depends on our assumptions. As I said, like empirically, it could be hard to reach some of the solutions.
Okay. I think that Professor Contreras may have something to say about this too. I think he's thought about similar problems. So this is a little bit like the core in the sense that you've got a bunch of different solutions. And if you look at the sum of the benefits, they're approximately the same. They're not exactly the same, but they're approximately the same. And so the choice of solution is really a distribution problem. I entirely agree with your point about this is not a repeated game. It's not as if they can announce certain costs one day and then change their mind the next day. And so if it's a one-shot game, it's pretty unlikely that they'll actually wind up there. But that aside, might the notion, once you have a bunch of solutions and they have to sort of agree on where to be there, might the Nash cooperative solution, so there's no exchangeable utility, but might that find some of these more likely than others to arise? Or do you think the Nash cooperative solution concept would not be applicable in this case?
This is really an interesting problem, and I think I could investigate it. But yeah, the assumption is that we use cooperative game theory. But if we consider manipulations, or even if we try to simulate some empirical outcomes, probably we need to use equilibrium analysis or other concepts. As you mentioned, Nash bargaining, where we try to multiply the gain of each player, also could be another solution concept. It comes from not cooperative game theory, from bargaining theory, but yeah, I think I implemented it one day, but it is not included in the thesis. So there are multiple things to consider here, and I think all of them will give additional insights on what should be the allocation on the systems and what should be the allocation if systems are manipulating the rule. It's really deserves further research, I think.
So I will just close and just observe that this has the very pessimistic outcome that the equilibrium appears to be where there are apparently no benefits or very few benefits. And it's a very interesting question as to whether that might be a general solution for n-person games, or whether under some circumstances you might have equilibria that have positive net benefits. And that, as you point out, that's for further research. And I think that would be a very difficult problem. But can you tell me whether anybody has done what you just did there? Has anybody looked at the equilibrium of a manipulation game and tried to talk about things like existence uniqueness, the properties of the solution? Or is this the very first one?
If I can speak for myself, well, the things that you mentioned, I think one of the problems of this Nash equilibrium, which is not repeated game, I mean, it's a single shot game, is that you have this prisoner's dilemma effect. I mean, having no information about the other makes you, find a solution for you that is not the best for everyone. So have you have more information, then things will change. Or if you repeated the game, if you do a tit for tat, a tournament game, in which you could go back and forth, then you could find some other solutions. But cheating, usually if you cheat and you cheat both ways, you can distort the problem completely. If you cheat one way in a Nash equilibrium, you will be discovered, because cheating will not be effective if you are the only one who cheats. But if there are two people who cheat, then I don't know, you could get a solution in which both are happy and both are lying. So there is, and this is not the best for the system, by the way.
So in terms of this manipulation game specifically, is there anything in the literature, or will this be the first paper about the equilibrium of a manipulation game, which would be very exciting?
I haven't seen that, but I'm not the best to say that. I have done some work on that, but maybe, game theory journals have this type of papers, probably. I don't know, frankly. So for me, it's the same. It's also the first time.
Andrew?
So I mentioned this in my thesis. I'm not the first one. And the term manipulability of allocation rules already existed before this thesis, and some early studies started, I think, from 1980s. And I mentioned the surname Thompson and Nissan. They are developers of the manipulation analysis and also the algorithmic game theory and algorithmic mechanism design, where they see this also another term that they introduce, strategy proofness, right? So I'm not definitely the first one. Maybe I'm the first one who implemented this in this particular field, but not the first one.
Is your payoff matrix the first time that somebody's used a payoff matrix to try to explore equilibria in any realistic context?
I saw that they use some mathematical proofs and so they try to prove strategy proofness of mechanisms mathematically, not like composing matrices mainly. But I think there is a lot of research done on this. So I'm afraid I'm not the first one.
Okay, thank you.
You, Elena, any thing? Audience, did we get any questions in the chat or whatever? Nothing.
Nothing till now. Maybe we shall give another
Yes.
call for questions.
Yes, maybe anybody from the audience would like to ask a question.
Okay, probably it is not a question, but some comment to Ben Hobbs and Javier discussion concerning manipulation. Andrey, can you show this matrix for the manipulation game?
One second. Can we show the matrix?
The matrix again? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, here it is.
Again, as Andrew mentioned, the issue of manipulation is typical for mechanism design area. And the question from mechanism design is following, that if we can find somehow the simple manipulation, so the agents can cheat easily. And what Andrew did show here, that it is not easy to manipulate in this game. Because if it's exactly like Javier mentioned, that if one side will cheat, yeah, for example, system A will cheat, it will receive a lot. And the same for system B, but it is not the dominant strategy, because if they will start to cheat simultaneously, they have somehow to predict each other. So the equilibria in the center of this matrix, it is really hard to compute them in real situation. So again, the main study is usually concerning if there is a simple way of cheating, so-called dominant strategy. And what Andrey did really show in this energy system, that this cheating will be not easy. I would like to point out this first. So yeah, there are kind of this research in different areas, but I do not know for energy system exactly. And probably this is a good idea, that the technical aspect of this system will reduce the possibility to cheat, to manipulate the result. And this is the first comment. And another comment to the Ben Hobb mentioning the political aspect of this TAP problem. I think that Andrew suggests some kind of a tool to help the politics to calculate how we can satisfy our ambitions, that, for example, countries should allocate the equal share. So Andrew's approach will allow us to calculate still somehow efficient solution, taking into account all these political ambitions. So the one side should receive no less than another one, something like that. So probably this type of tool will allow us to introduce game theory tools to kind of highly political influenced allocation problems like TAP. So it's not a question, it's just kind of comment for Andrew's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Nikolai.
Okay, so now we're at the step of comments from the supervisor before we go into deliberation. So I will let first Janusz talk, and after.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I make a comment about the candidate himself, I'd like to say a few words about the supervision of the students, you know, how the whole thing started. So, well, I'm listed as the first supervisor because, well, historically, I took Andrey on first. And also, so we worked initially on something else, but then we started to look at this project because that was stemming from some earlier work which we did with Irkutsk on analysis of this Northeastern Asia energy supergrid. And then we decided, okay, maybe that's interesting. David joined, and then from then on, from the technical point of view, it was David who was really the main supervisor and provided input to the thesis, but he will say afterwards. But what I would like to emphasize here, that it was a team effort and there were other people involved who are not formally supervisors. So Dr. Nikolai Korgin, who just spoke, and also Enzo Salma from Chile. And especially I'd like to acknowledge the help of Nikolai because he's a mathematician. Game theory is a very mathematical subject. We are just electrical engineers who are dabbing into game theory. So Nikolai's help was really to keep us on the ground and preventing us from discovering the real things which are well known in game theory, we just didn't know about. So I think, so thank you very much, Nikolai. I think your help was really essential in the whole work. And the second thing I'd like to acknowledge is the supervisors, the reviewers' comments. I mean, Andrey mentioned it initially, but I'd like to emphasize that the external reviewers are very much top experts in the world in that field. So first, I'd like to thank them to agree to provide their comments. But also is that the breadth and depth of their comments. So there were several pages of comments, and Andrew has prepared answers to those comments, and it went to I don't know how many pages, tens of pages. So basically, I've been to many of those kind of committees before, and I think this is the first time I saw so many deeply detailed comments. So I think they went over and beyond the call of duty. Providing their input, which significantly improved the quality of the thesis. So thank you very much indeed. Regarding Andrey, I think, well, there's nothing to add here. I think you have seen from the presentation, he's extremely well organized and serious person. He worked very hard throughout the whole work, throughout the whole project course. And well, it was a pleasure to be his supervisor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janusz. David?
Yeah, I'm here in the saddles. Probably you cannot see me, but I'm here in the distance. So I think I want to sum up with the acknowledgement of Janusz to the reviewers and to Nikolai and Enzo and of course Janusz. And about Andrey, I think like Andrey is kind of the ideal student. I think honestly, I have not too much experience, but if I have to describe some ideal student, probably is Andrey. Andrey has been very hardworking person. He is very passionate about what he's doing. He's always knocking my door, just asking me questions every time. I feel like I haven't seen any student like this. Of course, I have not too much experience, but if I have to give a definition of an ideal student, PhD student now, I think it's the kind of it's Andrey Churkin. And well, I'm sure he will be very successful in the future, and I hope he just stay with us in the community of power systems and see you, but maybe later in future avenues. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you to all. Thank you to Andrey. So now we'll go to deliberation of the jury members only. We'll ask Andrey to leave, and we will see you. Yes, so you can smile. I think the decision is unanimous. I can talk here to the microphone to make sure all the jury members, I guess they can see you there. Well, maybe you can go more to the center, Andrei. Yes. So the decision is unanimous and thesis as is and no corrections whatsoever. And we really congratulate you for great work. I think some of the comments from the jury is obviously great maturity, also great work on the thesis and very good defense and answers. And we wish you the best of luck for the future, Andrei. So congratulations.
Hearty congratulations, Andrew. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I say a few words?
Yes, of course.
Of course, I have to mention the contribution of my advisors, and I wouldn't be standing here without the guidance and support of my professors. So thank you, Janusz, and thank you, David. And also I thank my parents, my sister, brother, my friends, and my wife, Anna, is here today. So she prepared some cookies for you. Unfortunately, not for the Zoom reviewers. Maybe I'll send you later. So thank you very much. It's really very, very important achievement for me. And I like that. I saw that you enjoyed the thesis. This is very important for me. Thank you.
Great. So